Welcome, Flat Earth Debate Live. I'm your host, Nathan Oakley, and if you are new to this channel, or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and join button if you'd like to become a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member and keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. If you would like to support the channel, there is a super chat that runs alongside each of these shows while they are live, and there's also a PayPal, Patreon, and crypto link in the info box below the video. Most importantly, if you'd like to join the discussion, simply mute the page you are currently watching, then click the link in the info box below this video to join the panel and express your views on the nature of Earth. If you do join, please don't swear. If you do, you'll be ejected, and if you are, please don't try to rejoin the stream using sock accounts. You'll be warmly welcome back on the next stream. Please also share the show on social media. Sharing the show obviously increases the live audience, but this in turn increases the chances of a more diverse panel. So please share the show on Facebook and Twitter. One last time, if you're new to the channel or you've not done so already, then be sure to subscribe, hit the bell notification icon and join button to keep up to date with the Flat Earth Debate. Now we are joined by Sleeping Warrior, the Adam Meakin, 10th Man, Neil, and a whole bunch of people in Discord. So welcome, one and all.
Morning, morning.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good morning from a 3-inch snow-covered part of England. Did you guys have any snow overnight by any chance?
No, I had my mate in Manchester send me a picture of their lovely covering.
3 inches we got.
Technical message, Nathan. Your members only mode is on chat, live chat.
Yeah, I did that because I couldn't figure out how to turn it off when I scheduled the stream. Typically, I wouldn't schedule a stream on a Monday, but I did, and therefore it's members only, so lucky old you, members. But nevertheless, I've had a super chat from James Richard, which I'm going to read out before we do the housekeeping questions. Flat Earth versus globalist. We're witnessing today is a fight to keep truth hidden in unrighteousness, because this truth destroys all kings of Earth. Fair enough. Thank you very much indeed for the super chat, James Richard.
Hello.
Right, let's do some housekeeping. We'll rattle our way through it, and then we've got a little Sleeping Warrior presentation, which we'll get to after we've done housekeeping. Any evidence of a physical geometric sphere edge, formerly known as Earth curvature?
Not even from a non-physical ether.
The horizon's an optical phenomena. It varies with day-to-day, condition to condition. You can't call boats going over the horizon anymore because it's an optical effect.
Hold on. If the Earth was a ball, then it would not just be an optical effect.
Yeah, but if the Earth's not a ball, then it's an optical effect like it is in real world.
And what's your proof for this?
Refraction.
No, not refraction.
The black swan.
Just looking at stuff in general. By default, the horizon's not a physical location. Instinctually, and everyone knows this at a base level. The horizon's not physical. But then when you go to the Earth curve maths and turn everything into side profile, then suddenly you've got a physical geometric sphere edge that's getting in the way of things. Shout out to Unitox Femu. It's invisible, but it's there. You can think of it as being there, Unitox Femu. Thank you for the super chat. Any evidence of axial rotation of the Earth-based variety?
It all moves in lockstep, so there's no detection of motion, but because of the bending of space-time, the galaxy seems to spin around the Earth, even though to the galaxy the Earth is spinning within it. Does that answer your question?
Of course.
Yeah, that's your reference frame's knackered, Nathan.
Yeah, indeed. You and your reference frames are ruined.
Yeah.
Any evidence of the distance to the sun?
Oh,
Ooh.
Only apparent distances.
I don't know, but it sure throws a wrench in Arwen's baller argument of lockstep.
Hold on, Unitox Femu's slow on the answering of the questions. So he says stars moving. I assume that's in reference to axial rotation. That'd be the stars moving, though, wouldn't it? As opposed to us moving on an axis on a sphere Earth.
Oh, look, a red Ferrari just drove past me, Nathan. That means we're on a ball.
What, are you saying it's non sequitur?
Of course, it has to correct for Coriolis deviation at the steering wheel.
Just two rotors on the Chinook helicopter, mate. You can't distinguish whether you're on a sphere or not, an antipodal, just by looking at the sky.
Well, no, Arwin just hit the nail on the head. You would, because that would be an assertion that they're drifting with Coriolis deflection, i.e. you're turning underneath the stars and seeing them rotate because you're turning underneath them. Well, if that's the case, then we're on a non-inertial spinning reference frame, and things that leave that non-inertial spinning reference frame would drift away precisely as they claim on a globe Earth for us to observe Coriolis deviation. Distance to Sun is 186 blah 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 miles. We're moving on, are we, Unitox Femu? He's heckling us with super chats. I love it. Move on. Distance to the Sun.
But doesn't the sun? Well, there's no distance to the sun.
There's only apparent distances based on presuppositional vantage points.
Sure, we've just done this one, Nathan.
Like I say, we're being heckled with super chats. I'm not complaining, my friend.
So the Coriolis and the sun, when the sun goes down and lights the bottom of clouds. So when it's not attached to the Earth, right? Remember that one?
And all members, please stop heckling with super chats. You distract.
No, shush, Owen. I mean, I thought you... Sleeping Warrior. No. He says...
I would never say something like that.
I know you wouldn't. You're as into the cash as I am. Not that anybody doesn't need cash. Everybody requires paying in some form or another. So there we go. Unitox Femu says, give me the question. Well, any scientific evidence of gravity there, Unitox Femu? Or anybody on the panel, moreover. I'm just joking.
I don't know why
What's
anybody
gravity?
would think there's such a thing.
The mumbling from Sleeping Warrior and what's gravity from Arwin. Go ahead, Sleeping Warrior. What did you say?
I don't know why anybody would think that there might be a thing called gravity. Where do we see anything that gives us that indication?
Shouldn't that be relabeled any evidence for an effect?
Hold on. There might not be any... Well, if you would know what it is, there might be.
Hoping that you carry on
What
with
is
Arwin. Push it a little bit further.
Might be what Arwin...
If you would know what gravity was, then you might be able to find evidence for it.
Oh, right.
What is it, Arwen?
We know it's
It's
just...
We don't know.
This is
Next
getting tedious.
question.
This is getting tedious. There's an assertion there's a downward bias, Anthony. There you go. Done.
Is that because all objects of mass are more dense than the medium that they're in? There are no objects of solid matter that are less dense than the air, so one might inadvertently and incorrectly come to the conclusion that there might be a downwards acceleration bias because we see all objects of solidity more dense than the medium that they're in. That might be the misapprehension.
Yeah, pretty concisely put, I suppose.
Yeah. Downward bias is for the dense.
Comprehension.
Hold on a second. Say again, CIA, whatever the rest of your name is.
There's another miscomprehension. Like when you set an object on the table and you remove the table, you didn't add a force per se. You just removed the thing that was resisting it. So there's not that force. There's no down force.
Yes, there is. Relative density disequilibrium force of denser objects versus medium. And as long as it's
That's a nice
surrounded by a
story.
less dense medium, like air, even if it can't move, it's still going to press in that direction because it's still not at equilibrium with its surroundings.
You mean it's going to have resistance or not?
What?
So if I take the resistance, it's going to move. If I put the resistor back there at the table underneath your ass, then you're not going to move. If I remove the table, I didn't add a force to your head. I just removed the thing that was resisting your ass.
Let me just try the other way round, CIA, for Arwin. So if you replace the medium, you introduce liquid, and some of the things floated on it moved up in the room that they're in. Again, what force have you applied? You've just changed the medium that they're in.
Was that a question to me?
No, I'm just trying to reverse what he's saying. He's saying, well, if you don't remove it, it's like, well, what if you change the medium completely, introduce water, and then they go up? You know, if you say, well, if I remove the table, the thing will go down, but there's no force applied, you're just removing the thing that's resisting it, putting it into what's actually called fall arrest. That's what he's trying to describe. And likewise, well, it's arresting the fall, but it's also arresting medium like water, making all the stuff that's capable of floating moving upwards. If that was introduced, you know, it's the same principle. It's just medium specific. I'm just going to read out some of the super chats because they're coming in thick and fast. So, Unitox Femo says, I caused the mic to fall. Well, yeah, you do if you pick it up. We've also got James Richard, who says gravity fails to meet any, in quotes, of scientific methods, but you can think of it that it meets them all. Well, I suppose you could think of it that way. Shout out to Powell Broder, who's joined as a lion. Thank you very much for joining as a Nathan Oakley 1980 channel member. And also another Unitox Femu, who's hitting the super chat hard and fast today. Thank you for all your support. And same goes to you, James Richard. Gravity is a good word for proving everything. Or proving nothing at the same time. Thank you, Unitox Femu, James Richard, Powell Broder for the support. Move on with housekeeping.
Just hang on.
Oh, go on.
One time.
Okay, I was going to say that example was very good, because if you imagine a room with a inflated ball sitting on the table, and then you flood that room with water, as the water rises above the table, the ball is going to go up because of that medium. So that was a very good example.
Just the opposite of CIA's example, but yeah.
Again, though, it's an example of you're doing work. When you change the medium, work has been done to introduce a disequilibrium. And that's why the ball will move until it goes back into equilibrium. But the reason is you've introduced disequilibrium. Now, whether that was a rest caused by a shelf stopping the ball moving, then you change the medium, you've still done work by creating disequilibrium. You've done the disequilibrium in reverse. This time you've changed the medium as opposed to just creating disequilibrium by moving it out of equilibrium, lifting the object up. But you've still, the net effect is to create a density disequilibrium that then has to play out. In this case,
I can still give the example the way around that CIA did. If I apply, you say work, let's use a hairdryer to a puddle in a very short period of time, I can see a disequilibrium being created, and then the liquid will disappear because it's gone upwards. But work had to be done. Now, likewise, work by the sun, heating it up, would create that disequilibrium also. But an upward vector in that example without anything unnatural occurring. Like flooding a room. Not that that might not occur naturally, but I don't know, I said that.
Yeah, but the point being, work is being done, whether that's the work on the object or in this case the work in the medium. It requires the creation of disequilibrium for us to see density disequilibrium play out. There is no density disequilibrium when things are in equilibrium or in a rest from it. It can't play. Change has to occur first.
Right.
It doesn't do it on its own.
Indeed. Another shout out to Unitox Femu. So, sometimes nice to be Santa. I think he's referring to me pointing out that he's smashing the super chat hard and fast. Thank you very much indeed for being Santa, Unitox Femu. Really do appreciate your support. Right, we'll move on in housekeeping. Any single viable hypothesis from any of the fields of astronomy, cosmology, or astrophysics?
Dr. Becky can't formulate a valid hypothesis, unfortunately.
Can't she? Or won't she?
No, she can't. Oh, no, actually, she claims to be a physicist. Maybe she could, but most of the others can't.
Well, not in her field, right? But doesn't mean that she can't in general.
Oh, does she class herself as an astrophysicist?
Does she?
Who knows what Becky is? Anybody? 10th?
I'm going to say that Dr. Becky cannot formulate a valid hypothesis because she claims to be an astrophysicist.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I'll go double check and get back with you.
Thank you.
I was going to say 10th should know this. He knows her date of birth, how big her feet are.
No, he doesn't. He's not obsessed with her. He sent her one comment and then highlights the fact that she never responded, that the trolls defended her. That doesn't mean he knows her shoe size.
I'm just joking.
Wow, I'm going to defend 10th to the hilt when it comes to anything like this because she's female, therefore all sorts of implications could be drawn.
Actually, I do know phenomenon like shoes exist.
Shoes are not a phenomena of shoes. Come on.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. No,
but they can be phenomenal, though.
Yeah, but any hypotheses?
No, none.
Got plenty of phenomena. That's the point, right?
All these word in astrophysics, isn't it?
We covered this in the pre-show, right? There's plenty of phenomenon to be studied. What's causing this? What's causing that? Well, especially in
I've got
astro.
it.
Go on.
I've got it. I'm Dr. Becky Smethurst, an astrophysicist at the University of Oxford.
Yeah, your
I love
statement
making
stands.
videos about science with an unnatural level of enthusiasm. I like to focus on how we know things, not just what we know, and especially the things we still don't know. If you ever wondered about something in space and couldn't find an answer online, you can ask me.
Really? I see. You see how pertinent that is, given that's her blurb. You can ask me how you can have gas pressure without a container, then, right, Becky? How can you have gas pressure without a container?
Gravity, isn't it? That was what M. Scott Veitch did in his Forbes article. Gravity. Oh yeah, that thing that doesn't pull. Yeah.
Well, I did just what her about section on her channel just read. I asked her, and she still hasn't got back with an answer. Many people have asked her.
Maybe if you stopped obsession about her shoe size, you'd get somewhere.
This is where we got to give George Musa props, because he did get back to Craig and he did have a conversation with Craig. I think he's the only one that's ever had a conversation.
Quick shout out to Unisox Femu. It says, Diamond Rain on Saturn is answer. To what question, though? Maybe we'll never find out. And then he's heckling us to move on with the housekeeping, which I said I'd keep brief. Any evidence the Molten Iron core?
And that's all for me. Merry Christmas, Nathan, he says.
Says, that's all for me. Merry Christmas. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much for all the super chats. I really do appreciate it. And welcome, Elijah. But yeah, I will read out your super chat that's most pertinent because it hasn't been answered. Any evidence of a Molten Iron core? Thanks, Unitox Femi.
Squiggles on a graph that we call P waves and S waves, and that proves that the core of Earth is solid.
No, they don't. No, they got it wrong. They didn't predict correctly when digging down 12K.
Nathan, the P waves and S waves.
That's just repeating the same thing now, isn't it?
But they're not possible on any other shape, Nathan. P waves and S waves, I'm telling you.
Hold on. Now you've introduced a begging the question fallacy that you're going to assume the P waves and S waves are travelling through a spherical surface that you've assumed, even though I've pointed out that P waves and S waves are wrong when digging down 12K. So what, just introduce the fundy presupposition of a sphere on top of that, so I don't notice and you don't have to address that the P waves and S waves aren't consistently accurate in terms of their predictions?
Nathan, I'm a physics teacher. You're just a grocery delivery boy.
I yield. You win.
Oh, appeals to education is always the winner.
Of course.
Well, they can't even show us a physical Earth curve, and they want us to believe they have something 4,000 miles below us they know about, and that's Earth curve is on the surface and should be there 1.22 miles at 1 foot observer height. So if that's not there, then I doubt they know what's in their presupposition that we live on a ball that has a core.
Any evidence of the R value, Earth radius?
Another presupposition.
Assume it at all costs.
R?
Sasha's on the panel, I should say, Unisox Family. Thank you very much, as you're actually here to say thank you to for all the super chats. No, can't hear you. Didn't hear you, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. No, only I want to say to unmute me. Nothing. I have nothing to say more. Yeah.
No, I'm saying it to
Merry
you.
Christmas.
I'm saying to you, thank you very much for all the super chats. It's also kept the chat reasonably flowing because it's members only today.
It's Christmas time. It's end of the year. You know, I'm watching you like for 4 years.
Wow.
I appreciate your work, and that's it.
And I appreciate your support. Any evidence of the R value? Anybody at all?
But you need to promise me one thing. You need to come in fucking Coventry.
No swearing!
Coffee.
Totally ruined that.
When Corona finish, yeah.
When Corona finish, come and visit you, did you say?
Because we are here, man. In
Yeah,
Did he say Coventry?
Say again, Anthony?
Did he say Coventry?
I mean, yeah.
Unitox. It'd take a few more super chats than that to get me to Coventry.
That's
I was
terrible.
going to say the best thing about
Well,
Coventry.
I can come in Lamington, no problem.
We'll have to sort it out. Martin's been pestering me
It's
to do
10
an arranged...
minutes.
we will sort it out. Martin, in 2020, obviously this didn't come to fruition, wanted to do a meetup, maybe even replicate going to the cathedral we did the first meetup at. But that's something that hopefully will get arranged in 2021. So yeah, for sure, definitely, we will end up shaking hands. I'm in no doubt.
And man, I'm making so delicious pizza that you cannot imagine. You never eat that in England.
I feel
Can I
spoiled.
ask how you pronounce your chat name? Is it Unitox Femu? Because I look at that and go, it just goes like a sneeze.
Yeah, that means in Croatian, that means despite everything.
Despite everything. Oh, cool name.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's difficult to pronounce for English people. Yeah, and also it's difficult for me to speak English because that is third language.
Your third language?
Yeah, I lived in Italy 12 years. I speak
And what's your
Croatian,
second language?
Italian, and English.
What's your second language?
Italian.
Croatian, Italian. Yeah. Croatian is the native language. Is that what it's actually called? Croatian.
Yeah. Serbo-Croatian, because that was Yugoslavia. So, yeah.
I thought you said in creation.
Croatian. Anyway,
I'm Yugoslavian. If you want to know, but that country not exist anymore.
Excellent stuff. No offense, Unitox Femu, but we are going to continue with housekeeping. Everyone.
Okay, yeah, of course.
Thank you again for the support.
Hang on. When he said that his name meant despite everything, I thought he meant the spiders everything when he first said it.
I thought he said the start of everything.
In spite of everything. Croatia, then Italian, then English, third language. My God. Any evidence you can have gas pressure without a container?
No.
Despite everything, the ballers say no.
Yes.
Oh, here we go.
Gradient.
Darwin.
Gradient.
Gravity.
Gradient.
I don't know what it is, so next question. Sorry.
Gravity, which you don't know what it is, so next question. That's not going to work here. What are you talking about? Quoting Neil deGrasse Tyson about how he doesn't know what gravity is. We do from George Musa. It's not a force. So no, it's not holding gas here.
And Einstein. Better off citing Einstein.
Well, Musa quoting Einstein, gravity's not a force.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still bends space-time.
Maybe Musa is wrong.
Well, no, he's quite explicit about how right he is. He explicitly tells you that you can.
Questions of the Glover, when you make citation about some Neil deGrasse Tyson or Musa, whatever, they said, and if they are wrong.
But
you understand?
He's been explicit though. I was going to say he's been quite detailed in how you can think about it. So after explicitly telling you it's not a force, he disclaims that you can think of it as a force.
But how you can think?
Oh, you'd like an example? Anthony, can you detail emergent forces from Fight the Flat Earth, please?
Yeah, he's citing Professor Eric Verlinde from the University of Amsterdam, who's looking at a new way to describe gravitation using entropy, which is kind of our argument, a variation on our arguments. But Craig doesn't realise that at this point. He hasn't realised that it's supporting our position because he sees the word force as at the end of entropic force, and he thinks that's enough. So, it's entropy or entropic forces or apparent forces or emergent forces are all stemming back to Dr. Eric Verlinde, who describes an effect of entropy. That's the shortest way I can say it.
Okay, but entropy would dictate that the gas we're breathing would fill the space if the sky was a vacuum, so that's definitely not working in their favour.
Yeah, but it can be true because the sky is a vacuum, so therefore the second law of thermodynamics must be wrong.
Well, no, they say the second law of thermodynamics does not apply to the Earth, meaning that it doesn't apply to their model because it violates the second law of thermodynamics, natural law, as in laws we observe in nature.
I was having a good conversation with somebody, a ball earther on Flat Earth 24/7 on Discord the other day, and I realised how triggered he got. You know, you call it the sky is not a vacuum. Well, I said I went outside for a walk in space today, and he said, you went to a walk in space? And I explained what I meant. Because on their model, obviously, it's an open system, so there's no barrier between the deep space and us, because we're in it. But he's like, no, there is a barrier. Oh, really? What is the barrier? He said, it's the atmosphere. I said, right, and where does the atmosphere stop and where does space begin? And he didn't give a coherent answer. And I said, there is no barrier, is there? So in the end, he conceded that there was no barrier. And I said, right, so when I go outside into the air or the atmosphere, I could equally call that space because there's nothing separating us between the two.
Yes,
and he had to concede.
And do you know who also defines it that way?
Who?
NASA.
Really?
Yeah, space starts at sea level.
Oh, brilliant. I'd love to see. Where's that? Oh, you'll have to present that, Nathan, at some point.
I'll dig it out.
Because if space starts at sea level, where does space start sea level? That kind of fucks their whole argument up, doesn't it?
Well, other than at sea level, if space was a vacuum, if the sky was 10 to the minus 17 torr vacuum, then the gas we're breathing would fill the space, and we would be at 10 to the minus 17 torr at sea level.
Oh, dear.
Any evidence?
Doesn't the imagine?
Go on, John. Is that John?
Yeah, I was going to say, doesn't the imaginary containers run out to the Kármán line, or does it go to the moon now with imaginary containers?
Depends which reference. I think it was 1996 or somewhere thereabouts. They introduced this idea of the atmosphere extending to the moon. It then got buried, only to be dug out in about 2017, I'm going to say. Was it 3 or 2 years ago? Was it 2018 they started quoting this nonsense from 1996 about the gradient going all the way up to the moon, with the moon spinning around us, so like a whirlwind flying through space, I suppose. When you imagine the corkscrew image of the heliocentric model flying around the great attractor, you see it in this corkscrew motion, right? Well, if you've got the moon with an extended atmosphere like a sperm tail extending to the moon from Earth, and that's whizzing around us and we're whizzing around the sun, you'd have literally like a hurricane motion of atmosphere going around as you looked at it from a third perspective. You know, if you could get out away from their ideas of this great attractor with us flying around the sun with the sun flying around it. Just absurd. But there we go.
Hey, Nathan, when you're done with the housekeeping, there's a message Bev posted in Master B.
Message for me in Master B? Did you say? I didn't catch the end of that. Say that again, Tenth.
Yes, Bev posted the message. It looks like it's coming from Ranty in Master B.
I was going to go to Sleeping Warrior with his presentation because we have just finished housekeeping. I don't think I've missed anything out. So can it wait till after?
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, is it on topic for this specific question? Is all I'm asking. If not, we go to Anthony. Then
No, like it can wait. We have time on the show.
Perfect. Anthony's going to present something now. So what I'd ask of the Discord and G+ panel, if you can just keep any questions that you've got till the end of the presentation, even if you don't necessarily agree with what's being presented, it doesn't matter. I don't care. I want to get to the end of it before anybody interrupts. So if you can bear or give Sleeping Warrior indulgences in this regard while he's presenting. I do actually have you on screen now, Sleeping Warrior, so...
You see my Good Times for All screen, yeah?
No, I just see a black screen.
Oh. Stop sharing. Let me retry that. Present now. Entire screen. Should be that one. Do you now see it?
Nope.
I see it.
Really?
Me too.
Okay, what I'll do then in that case is I'll try something like pinning me and then unpinning me and pinning you. Let's just try if that works. There we go.
Right. So, this has come because someone sent me a link. I wouldn't normally have caught this because it happened over Christmas. But someone sent me a link and a timestamp. So shout out to the people that send me info. It helps progress the conversation. The presentation's for the purpose of anybody that might be on the fence with regards to whether or not there is a downwards acceleration force that appears to be like gravity or not. If you're not sure, this is the way you need to come back to in future. So make a note of the time of this. It's like 30 minutes in, and obviously it's on this particular show. Okay, so it comes from Zach's channel. Zach had a conversation with a few people the other day. It's entitled Talking Electricity with LC King, Grabbing Energy Out of the Air on Good Times for All channel. And it's only had 560 views now, but it was only streamed 2 days ago on Boxing Day. My comments underneath, you'll come to that in a minute, so I'm not going to read it out now. I want to try and get through it as quick as I can. So I don't have any beef with Zach personally, or on topic as far as I'm aware. He did bring us to the topic of diffraction and how things blend into the horizon, and that was one of the key things that we realized was happening with regards to the layer of dirty air at the horizon, or ether band, or whatever you want to call it. The effect we see at the horizon that distorts what we perceive is one of the key things that he brought to the topic, and that's progressed the story and credit where it's due. I don't have any issue with Zach personally. Might not agree with everything he says, but nonetheless, that's what he brought to it, and that was a really big moment for us. Now, I'm going to cite 3 video clips from Bob saying stuff, and I've got them circled in this bit here. You can see where they are if you want to go back and listen to them from this hangout, and it's 3 points deliberately to move the conversation forward. There's no personal attack. It's just to point out things that might not be actually true or things that are actually incorrect. So I'm going to flick over to my sound feed so I can pick it up now, but I'm going to also present on screen what he actually says and my response. So hopefully, if I now play this, you guys should hear it. So there's a little bit longer, so you hear that I'm not cherry picking it. So let me patch this through.
If you take a gas and you put it next to a chamber that is evacuated, right? You've created a vacuum chamber in it, and you have a little window in between them, and you open them. Is it true then that the gas will go in and fill the available space and go bouncing around all over the place? The answer to that is absolutely yes. There is no doubt about that will happen. It does happen. Nobody is disputing that. However, what what is being ignored here is that after a while, what will happen is the gas collisions will eventually begin to slow, right? They will, those collisions will become less violent as that energy is kind of depleted out of that initial energy transfer. And the gas will begin to settle and start taking on a density gradient bottom first. So in other words, what I'm saying is that the gas will settle on the bottom and it will provide its own gradient.
So Bob emphasized the final bit, the bottom first bit. My response is that, hey, Bob, gas collisions are elastic and do not lose momentum over time, as you wrongly asserted, from 1 hour, 8 minutes onwards. Your incorrect assertion is therefore not the cause of any layering. So what else could be causing it? I know, we can test it too. Now, there's actually 2 causes to it, which I'm going to show you in a sec. But density is one element to it, and the other element is the sun and the biogeochemical cycle, which we'll come to. So he's wrong to say that the collisions between the container walls are losing momentum because they're elastic. And I only learned that in the last fortnight or so, courtesy of Meakin. And I didn't realize the importance of it when he said it. But the elastic collisions mean that they do not lose momentum, contrary to what Bob is saying, and therefore that cannot be the cause of any perceived gradient or pressure gradient or density gradients, whatever you want to describe it. I've got this background laid in such a way to create the perception that I'm trying to describe. Bob's perception is that the cause of this gradient in the atmosphere is the loss of momentum. He doesn't realize, and he won't accept this when it's pointed out to him, but he has to accept it because the collisions are elastic and there is no net loss from the collisions between the walls of the container and the molecules themselves. So there is no momentum loss. That's the first point. Second point I want to go to now, if I go back to this, at 1 hour, 11 minutes and 12 seconds onwards, this is what Bob then says.
Coming out with these challenges, trying to explain to me about how there is no downward vector. Well, I'm sorry, Sleeping Warrior, there is a downward vector. It can be proven every way but Sunday, and you simply ignore all of it. I see why the ballers have a problem with these guys, because there is a downward vector.
So Bob's insisting that there is a downwards vector, right? This perception is caused by the perception that everything drops to the ground. Well, that's because you can't pick up fluids, liquids, and all objects of mass are all more dense than the medium in air that we live in. There is no downwards vector, Bob. From 1:11:12, you insist that there is a downwards vector. Bob, all solids are more dense than air. The least dense or the lightest solid that we have is said to be that pale blue stuff, aerogel, which is this stuff here. It is around 6 times more dense than air. Your perception is that all the solids are being downwards biased. No, they are more dense than its medium. And if we increase the density of the medium, guess what? That aerogel will become the egg and rise, contrary to your belief that there is some bias. The perceived bias is caused by the relative density of the two things in question. So the aerogel is more dense than the air that it sits in. And that's said to be the lightest known solid, man-made solid, but it makes my point. So the perception that there is a downward bias is because all objects of mass are greater or more dense than the medium that they're in. So that gives you the perception that there is a downward bias, but it's not. It's caused by the differences or the differential between the solids over liquids and gases, because all solids are more dense than gas, all of them. So that deals with the second point. Move to the next slide. So 1 hour, 16 minutes in, this is what he says.
But, otherwise, I'm not going to change my mind on this. It is obvious to me that there is an absolute down. There is an absolute down. Up and down are not relative directions unless you're a ball earther and you subscribe to Einstein's relativity. Up and down are absolutes. There's no way around it. And the reason they are absolutes is because there is an ongoing, small, minor, very weak downward acceleration that is present. Now, as far as what causes that, that's wide open for debate. Now, is it true?
Okay, so it is obvious to me that there is an absolute up and down. The key point here is it is obvious to me. Up and down, by definition, are relative directions. So to Bob, there is an up and down. That is true. But that doesn't make it universal. It doesn't make it objective. It doesn't make it an absolute. It is obvious only to Bob, okay? Because Bob's left or right would be the opposite for me. So what Bob would call right, I would call left, because I'm facing Bob, yeah? So it's obvious only to Bob that there is an absolute up and down. No, not absolute. It's relative to the human. So, and by the way, when Bob compares up-down relative directions to Einstein's relativity, that is a false equivalence, because it is not relative to Einstein's theory of general relativity. Bob conflates these two things, and they're completely and utterly wrong. So when Bob compares relative directions to Einstein's relativity, it's a false equivalence because they're not connected. But he's making it sound like they are so that he can cause division between relative directions and Einstein's relativity, and they're not the same thing. So correct him when you hear him say that. It's a false equivalence. Okay, so let's go back to the slides. So all my comments that I've just read out are all in this thing, which is hidden on Zach's channel. If you do want to read the message again, it's on screen for you. There's the gradients that we're talking about in the atmosphere. It's a visualization of. It's more pressure at the bottom. It's less pressure at the top. It's caused by the air depleting. And the question is it being pulled down the way Bob claims or believes or pushes? Or is there another explanation for it? We know what the biogeochemical cycle is. We get taught it in primary school when we're about 8. But we forget about it as an adult because it's not something that we come across very often. If you want to know more about this, just look at the pictures when you type in biogeochemical cycle on Google, then click images, and it tells you pretty much everything that you need to know. The bit that it doesn't tell you is that it's a collection of cycles: the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus, the oxygen, the hydrological cycle, the water cycle. There's about 10 or 12 of them. There's a lot of them that go on, and they're all caused by the sun. So the biogeochemical is a collective phrase to describe a whole variety of cycles, and they're all literally charged and powered by the sun. Okay. Now, the atmosphere that we live in, or the air that we breathe, we need to know 2 key words. We need to know isotropic, and we need to know homogeneous, and know what these words mean. If the atmosphere is isotropic, it is ununiform in all directions. If it is homogeneous, it is of the same kind. Now, we don't have a homogeneous atmosphere, but we do have an isotropic. Isotropy is ununiformity in all directions. Well, there is no uniformity in the atmosphere. It's a dynamic system charged by the sun, excited by the sun, and created by all the gas pressure. All the gases are created at ground level. So the sun is exciting the air that we breathe, but it's also causing the creation of gases at ground level, be it water or land. All of the gases are created at ground level, charged and powered by the sun. The reason for the gradients, as this image shows, the gradient is the sky, obviously, is caused by the creation of gases at ground level. We got taught it when we were 6, 7 years old. But because it gets so convoluted by science, no one remembers it. No one remembers it because gravity makes more sense. Logically, it does seem to make sense. But this is the reason why there's the gradients at the bottom. There's more pressure at the bottom because all the gases are created at ground level and they all rise through dispersal. They all disperse into the atmosphere. But when the sun disappears at nighttime, a lot of them then come back down again because the temperature reduces and we have something called condensation, or the condensing of gases. They all fall back to the earth. So that's the reason why there's a density gradient, right? That's why we have it getting more pressure at the bottom, less pressure at the top, and it's relative to the human, right? Really, the correct units are more dense and less dense because that's what it is, which takes me back to my test. Back in May of 2019, I demonstrated that by manipulating the medium, I caused an acceleration. Now, by changing the density of the medium, it doesn't really matter how you argue over it. Bob said in his last thing that you can argue over the cause. In that last clip that he said, let me flip back to it quick. He said, as far as what causes the downwards acceleration, that's wide open for debate. Well, we know that the biogeochemical cycle deals with one part of it. But when it comes to liquids and solids, this is the cause on the other side of it. So if you're talking about gases, because all solids are more dense than gases, then we're talking about the gas laws and the biogeochemical cycle. If we're talking about fluids and liquids and solids and things that go on that we can touch because they're perceptible to touch, then we do know the cause. So it depends on what you're talking about, sky or land or tangible things that we can touch. But we do know the causes of them. Gravity is literally being used, or this downwards acceleration bias or perception or electrostatics or whatever phrase you want to call it, is literally trying to confuse people. The simplicity is demonstrable, it's repeatable. We can all do it on ourselves with no experience, no expensive tools, it's just very simple to do. We can test it, we can show it, we can prove it. We know what causes this downwards bias, which in this test demonstrated that the egg went up. So we know what causes it, and it depends on the medium. So final slide. Bob calls this down because Bob is human. Using the correct verbiage that Bob refuses to accept, the correct direction is simply more dense. And unless there is a human there to call it down, down is relative only to a human. It is a false equivalence to compare down being relative to Einstein's general relativity. Right, I'm done, boys.
Okay, I posted that link to that wiki last slide in the live chat, so check it out if you want to read that. But yeah, it describes it specifically as being relative to a human, i.e. your perception is based on you, as opposed to a fish's perception or something else. You know, it's relative. So it's very specific in that. But yeah, thank you very much. Good presentation. If anyone wants to challenge it, have any comments, feel free to. Hold on, Anthony. If anyone wants to, and can you back off your mic a little bit? Because you keep causing plosives. Anyway, anybody wants to challenge that, feel free. Now's your chance.
I want to know if he disagrees with Bob.
You having a laugh?
Off with his head!
Off with his head!
Let's keep the nonsense to a minimum. Does anybody actually disagree or want to challenge anything that Sleeping Warriors just presented?
I do want Adam to comment on the elastic collisions, because I didn't realise the significance of the elastic collisions until I heard Bob describing the slowdown in momentum of the gas pressure that was causing a perceived gradient. Adam?
Yeah. I'd like to see something that would corroborate that. I mean, from my understanding in the little setup that was described, if you release those molecules, then they'll be subject to gas behavior. Now, the way in which we would describe the energy state of those molecules and their speed and the likes would be to use PV equals nRT. So the thing that would vary, once you've just introduced those few molecules in there, the thing that's going to vary their speed everything else is fixed. The number of molecules is fixed. The volume is fixed. So the only thing that's going to change the rate of those collisions is the temperature. So you could slow the molecules down, but that would be as a result of a drop in temperature, as defined by PV equals nRT. I don't understand where they would be running out, because as you say, an elastic collision means they just hit each other and carry on as they were. There's no loss of energy with the collision.
That'll be something that we can ask Bob to demonstrate, though, right? If Bob thinks that there is a reduction in momentum, then we can show pressure loss as a function of time, because the momentum is lost during the non-elastic collisions that Bob thinks must be there.
Right, it's fundamentally incorrect. I think that was pretty much detailed by Adam, and yes, correct. The elastic collision detail has been part of the presentation in terms of the fake space we call a sky vacuum in basically every single presentation QE's done. Now, that's not to say that the significance, and I totally agree with Anthony, I'd heard it in every presentation QE had done, but it hadn't recognised the significance in terms of how you can then use it to your advantage when you're debating, until Adam pointed it out a couple of weeks ago. And so, I don't know why it was specifically for both me and Sleepy Mario, but we both kind of had a half eureka moment going, well, that's actually a really useful angle. And in Anthony's case, he's like, well, I've never heard of elastic collisions. And I was like, yeah, you have. You've heard them in all these presentations. And he's like, oh, yeah, I have. But it's just the way Adam, I don't know what it was about Adam's phrasing. But anyway, I want to get to Paul, who was trying to get a word in there, which is why I've just interrupted with that long little rant. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I think, the way I understand it, just to kind of back up what Adam is saying, heat is the vibration of the particle. It's not the direction of the particle, it's just the vibrational. And what causes that is when photons hit the particle, it heats up and it starts to vibrate. Of course, everybody's screaming in the background, but it's the momentum and the direction that the elastic collisions occur. But the vibration is the movement of the particle just vibrating, causing the heat.
Did everyone catch that? Adam, did you catch that?
Yeah. As I said, and that vibration rate is in PV equals nRT. The simplest way is if you increase the temperature, it's vibrating faster. As Paul's described, you can introduce energy like with a photon and heat it up with sunlight. That's the case. But I'd like to see this. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of what Brian was saying. And there is certain gas behaviour when we put things under pressurized systems where you will. Brian was talking about some industrial uses where they were saying you must agitate a cylinder beforehand, and that is correct. You will get some ordering when you put a gas into a cylinder under high pressure. There is relative density ordering that occurs, but that doesn't occur when it's just everything's just acting under gas behavior. The reason that occurs is when it's under very, very high pressure, then you get a phase transition. So not directly, but the gas molecules begin to act more, in fact, very similar to liquid, because they've been compacted so close together. Even though they are gas-like still, there's nowhere for them to behave truly like gas molecules. So they start to behave with more direct fluid dynamics. And there you will get some density settling because they are behaving like fluids. Now, that is why you have to shake the canister, but you're shaking the canister to mix liquids, not mix gases. And that's where I think there may be, from my understanding of aerosol technologies and the likes, that's why you do that there. It's when it's under very, very high pressure. And it's because, again, it's not acting like a gas, it's acting like a liquid. That's why you get some kind of set that you could describe it as ordering of the gases, but it's not ordering of gases, it's ordering of liquids.
But exactly. So I want to reiterate that. In other words, in a normal setting, that would be nature. That does not occur. Now, that's not to say that you can't force it into that setting. A good example would that be Hillbilly Blue Balls forcing butane into a pipe. That doesn't change what happens naturally in nature. Now, entropy increase will still absolutely, without question, occur. In other words, come back a week later, there's nothing left in the pipe. It's all dissipated because there's gaps between it. Now, as Adam's pointing out, you can get gas to behave in certain ways if you force them together so there's no gaps, but that isn't how gas behaves in nature. Now, if you go up to a very high altitude, the mixtures, they're basically the same. Now, that's in flux generally. We're in dynamic systems, so it's not to say that you'll measure it at the top of Everest and go, well, look, there's a very slight variation in the amount of nitrogen. Well, yeah, that's because it's in flux. It's always changing. Everywhere, always. But as a basic general rule, as an oversimplification, it's the same exact stuff. There's just less of it because there's hardly any of it being created. But because there's gaps between it all just mixes up in pretty much the same way. It's an anisotropic, inhomogeneous mixture of gases. But when you go up high, it's not separating out into nitrogen and helium. That's not what's occurring.
And just to kind of add to that just a little bit, I mean, when you the vibrational rate of a particle, it's able to actually create bonds between other particles. So that's what creates things to condense, to create a liquid, to create a solid. But if the vibrational rate is high, it won't happen. It can't happen, or it'll be less likely to happen.
And that might be attributable to all sorts of different things. It might be that the cause establishes that electrostatic forces causes that. Well, great. Let's establish it with science. Why does that happen? Why do we have phase changes? That's a phenomenon that we can study with science. So, wonderful. Some things are definitely within the remit of science. Now, if you want to establish the cause of those phase changes, more power to you. But in the meantime, the overriding idea that we have a downward bias is shattered by things going up. And the idea that they're losing energy as they go up, notwithstanding that you do have PV equals nRT, and you can calculate how much you're going to slow down, if you want to call it that, based on temperature. But we still have elastic collisions. The amount of force that they're going to apply to the container that they're in will change with the concentration because there's less particles pressing on the walls of the container. But their collisions are still elastic regardless of how low the concentration is, therefore the lower the pressure, higher up, where the gases aren't being created. Was that a succinct enough summary for this particular discussion? Anthony, Adam, Paul?
I think the only thing I'd add is the aerogel point is that all solids that we know of, there might be some less dense than aerogel, but all solids that we know of are more dense than the medium. That's why there is the perception of a downward bias, but it's not. It's a perception only subject to the human. The actual reason why they are separating is by virtue of their density, and we know that because we can manipulate it to prove it. Because if I change the medium, the density of the medium of the air around the aerogel would become the egg. That's what would happen. I don't know whether you can get a gas that's 6 times more dense than air, but if you could, that's what would happen because I demonstrated it.
Quick shout out to James Richard, who's going back on the conversation about half an hour, but nevertheless, all good. Becky is a pseudoscientist communicator. Sorry, I'll start that again. Becky is a pseudoscience communicator and up there with the best of them. Yeah, a reference to Mick West, who called himself a science communicator while he punted his mathematics and pseudoscience reifications of physical horizons blocking boats and buildings, now denied by fundies. Thank you very much indeed for the super chat, James Richard. And thank you, Anthony.
I was wondering if...
Go on, Paul. John, sorry.
I was wondering if... I work in construction a lot, and asbestos is something we run into, and when it becomes friable, it'll hang in the air for years on end in a closed system. Is that affected by Bob's downward bias?
When any gas is violating this idea of a downward bias, gas expands in all directions, and the collisions between it and the container and itself are elastic. So it's going up. As much as it's going down and bouncing off and going back up again, it's going in all directions. So this idea of a downward bias is essentially violated by gas, which doesn't have a downward bias.
Well, asbestos is a solid that hangs in the air.
Yeah, fibers.
Yeah, but what he's saying is, like dust, I suppose, when you shine the sun through your room, you'll see a load of dust particles suspended in the air, and they're solids, right? That's what he's saying. He's saying that asbestos is light enough to be suspended in the air for a very long period of time, and maybe the system we're in is dynamic enough to keep asbestos in the air for years, maybe. But it's a solid he's saying isn't going down. It's being suspended.
Can we address suspended, Nathan? It's not being suspended. It's being hit loads, isn't it? It's being subject to lots of collisions, which is why it doesn't go in a direction itself. Yeah, it's just subject to collisions. But suspension's a funny one, because suspension is more related to a fluid description.
That's just my bad in terms of my vernacular. The particles of air are hitting it, and it's becoming part of that description when we describe elastic collisions. Well, they also hit anything else that's in the air. Now, often it won't be the case that will make any difference to the path or vector of that particular piece of asbestos, but in this instance, there is small enough particles of asbestos that the elastic collisions with the gas that are in the air that we can't see keeps it suspended, correct?
Yeah. I was being anal.
Suspended, I used the word again. I totally ruined that by using the word suspended.
If the wind is not completely still, if there's airflow pressure differential, then that pressure differential will also carry the dust around and make it seem to float, but it's basically just doesn't get a chance to settle down perfectly. Because if you do the same setup in a perfectly isolated room, then eventually it will all go down to the bottom.
No, that's what he's saying. No. He's saying quite the contrary. He's saying even in a completely controlled circumstance, you'd still have asbestos with merely the elastic collisions of the gas keeping it in the air, i.e. not on the ground. I can't think of a word that's not suspended now. You bugger.
I wish I had tested.
Fnet wouldn't be a net force. You got net forces all around it, keeping it in that position.
Yeah. Well, the force of the gases banging into it is what Adam's saying. I just used the word suspended incorrectly, which makes it sound like it's either your egg in a solution, or it's just a wrong word.
No, it is the right word. It's me, but there is a distinction between the as Brian would say, the structural mechanics that's going off in terms of that suspension within air and liquid. It's a very different. There's this constant contact within a liquid as things flow over what you're suspending, whereas within the gas it's just constant loads and loads. A good way to analogy is what Arwin said. It's not going in any, and I wouldn't necessarily vouch for it always staying up there, but within the dynamicness of the atmosphere, the air we breathe, just the air, it's going to keep moving, and the way in which it moves and it floats, and the way you see a feather float, is a good example to demonstrate the randomness of the collisions. So as this thing goes one way or the other, it's not going in any direction. Its direction is determined by the randomness of the collisions that hit that molecule, and that determines its direction, if you say.
Right. And there's another factor too in the whole play of forces in this case, and that is if it is a object that is extremely small, then like its surface area might be still relatively big. So the smaller it becomes, the surface area in relation to its netto density will become bigger relatively the smaller it gets. And so because of its surface, it may still get the full blow, literally, of any gas pressure differential, of any pressure that happens, and thus it will have a tendency to stay afloat longer in relation to more solid, bigger objects that have more density in relation to their netto surface.
Do a quick couple of shout outs to Retro Bill, who says, really enjoying this conversation. Thanks, guys. And I really appreciate your super chat. Thank you very much indeed, Retro Bill. Also, Desmond Hume, who says, members only, scared of public inquiry, eh? No, there's a link in the info box. You can join and express your views verbally, as opposed to spamming my chat with your rhetoric, which often doesn't get responded to by the people on the show. But if you did want to join, there's an after show that is going to follow now. So if you are watching this on either Nathan Oakley 1980 or Nathan Oakley premiering streams, then stay tuned, as there will be an after show to follow. I've been Nathan Oakley, and I'll see you all in the next video.